folks, we usually drift into a realm that Pete is very, very expert in, other than options and investments, and that is sports. He does a 2-hour sports show on WCCO with his buddy Schultz. Schultz?
Schwartz.
Schwartz. May the power of the Schwartz be with you.
Yes.
But Pete does that show on WCCO, folks, on Sundays, 10 to noon Central Time. But you were out in San Francisco, Pete, hanging around with your favorite players and coaches, the 49ers, of all places, the number 2 team in all of football last year. Maybe you want to say a little bit about that before we drop into all the rest of your sports observations.
Sure. The 49ers, it was the OTAs, John, and that basically all that really means is they're all getting together. It is optional, but most everybody shows up. I did see Deebo Samuel there, talked to him for a little while. Let me tell you, what a great guy. Because when I saw him, John, I'm like, hey, Deebo, how you doing, man? And he's like, hey, Nigerian and all that stuff. We're going back and forth. And I go, hey, I'm going to be at your old school later on this year. And I said, Clemson, right? He goes, South Carolina. So I kind of put my foot in my mouth on that one. But he was still laughing about it. A lot of the guys were there, John. Not everybody was there. Kittle was there, but he didn't participate. And that's fairly normal. So people sometimes like to make a big deal out of this guy being not there. Bosa was not there. I talked to a lot of the guys. I talked to the physical trainer and everything, and he goes, hey, Pete, the reality with Bosa is he is so committed and so disciplined that he gets worse if he comes here. He already knows the defense, so there's no reason for him to be here. So he's actually in Florida right now. That's where he trains. So he's doing his whole thing. But I did see some interesting things. One thing I will leave with you on this one, John. How about this? So I'm there, been there for a couple hours, walking around with various people, and a lot of great people. They have some wonderful people on their team, and some of the coaches are guys that I played against. Keena Turner, you probably remember that linebacker. He was one of the guys, and they really gave me the unbelievable tour of things and let me get a big feel for everything. And Brock Purdy was there, right? Mm-hmm. So who was the last guy on the field? First guy on the field, last guy off the field, and he was there at least an hour, and I say at least an hour after practice because I left. So what player would do something like that, do you think?
Yeah, well, a guy that was Mr. Irrelevant. A guy that had to fight his way on to make a roster and then made himself into one of the best players in the NFL. A guy that's going to sign a record contract at the end of this season, Pete. That kind of guy.
Well, and he's that kind of guy as far as he's a great guy. He's a team guy. He's committed. And, John, at the very end of practice, he has guys out there that probably should have. If I were one of those players on the offensive side of the ball, I guarantee you one thing, I'd be out there with Brock until he's done. But guys were walking off, and everything like they can, and they, basically should. But I'll tell you what, he was throwing to the ball boys. He was throwing to the trainers. He was throwing all this stuff. And he was working on his craft and throwing a great ball, by the way. The guy looked really, really good. I thought he was amazing. By the way, on the same note, we might as well bring this one up too, John. Justin Jefferson. 4 years, $140 million, $110 million of it guaranteed. The highest paid player, not a quarterback, ever.
Wow.
So take that in for a second. I mean, that is just absolutely extraordinary. And that just happened within the last couple of hours. And he's already put stuff up on Twitter and stuff, talking about thanking God and thanking everybody involved. And you should. It's great that he does. I appreciate the guy that much more. He's a great kid up front too, John. When you meet him, he talks, he's nice. He doesn't just stand there and pretend like he's talking to you and then walks away. He's not one of those guys. Good guy, looks you in the eye, and he'll talk to you as long as you want. So great person. All right, the next thing I just wanted to jump onto this, John. How about this? In the NFL, they're always getting these guys that are track athletes or some other sport. Maybe it's an amateur sport, whatever it might be. In this particular case, it's track and field. In this case, it's field. So we got a guy who's a gold medalist from right here, the University of Minnesota, Dan Gable Stevenson. By the way, Dan Gable's an interesting first name for a guy who didn't go to Iowa. But anyway, Dan Gable Stevenson Now, he won the gold medal in 2021, and the reason it was 2021, COVID and all the rest of it. 6 foot, 270-pound kid, and he just signed with the Buffalo Bills. So here's the interesting thing, and I'll throw this one out for you, John. So Brock Lesnar did the same thing with the Minnesota Vikings, right? He was a pro wrestler and, a different type of sport altogether. He had played some high school football, but high school football, it's a little different than the NFL. It didn't go so well for Brock Lesnar. But there are guys out there who, Bob Hayes, Curly Culp, Willie Gault, Michael Carter, that shot putter who threw 82 feet in high school, John, was unbelievable. Texas guy, played for the 49ers. He's up on the wall there. There's another guy named Stephen Neal, an offensive guard for the 3-time Super Bowls, at least for him, with the New England Patriots. So he did pretty well. Here's the one thing. Every one of those guys, I looked it up, every one of the guys I mentioned all played at least high school football and in some cases college football. Now, Dan Gable Stevenson's never played football ever. He didn't play 5th grade football. He didn't play high school football. He didn't play college football. So the question for you is, can this guy play in the NFL? I think he's a D tackle.
Well, it'll be very instructional for other great athletes to see if he can turn these skills, because as you said, Olympic champion, Pete, named after the great Dan Gable, and he is not related. His mother was in love, apparently, with Dan Gable. I don't know what his dad thought of that.
Yeah, I was
but
a little bit nervous.
I want to name my kid Pete Nigerian Macumber or whatever. It's like, what? But here he is, Dan Gable Stevenson, Olympic champion, fantastic wrestler. His older brother in the WWE, Pete. His older brother wrestles, I think, under the name Kemp or something like that. Mm-hmm. Now, can he translate the great skills that he's got into like a nose guard or something like that? Maybe. I mean, he's definitely going to be one of the great athletes on the field, but it is a different sport completely than what he's used to. If he was to go into UFC, okay, still not the same sport as the one he's in, but there are a lot of really successful wrestlers, jiu-jitsu artists, taekwondo, karate, any of those things in the UFC, not so much in the NFL. So obviously the odds are stacked against him, despite a guy like Brock Lesnar, who, certainly at his size and weight looked like he could be a guy that might make the Vikings. And I know he tried out at least once, Pete, if not twice, for the Vikings, like you said. But hey, I'll be it'll be compelling to see if he can indeed compete with these guys. He's got the skills. He's going to be as strong as any person on that line, offense or defense, and he's going to be quick. So who knows? Alan Page, as you know, Pete, I played with Alan Page in the twilight of his career. When he came out of Notre Dame, he's 275 pounds, MVP of the league as a defensive player. But by the time I was playing with him, he was 225. But he was still cat quick, and he could get into the gap so quickly that he could disrupt plays. Maybe this guy is like that, as well as stronger, because he's 270 pounds. I'm anxious to see him, Pete. I wish the team, I wish the Buffalo Bills practices were on TV, because I'd be watching.
Well, I wish they had him Hard Knocks. Maybe they ought to last minute just thinking, hey, we're going to Buffalo.